A stormy night. Thunder crashing like a warning from the heavens, shaking the walls of a quiet home where a little boy presses his trembling hands against a rain-streaked window. "They're crying for me," he whispers, his voice barely a thread in the chaos. What if those cries weren't just the wind? What if they came from lost souls in the wild, begging for someone, anyone, to hear them? This isn't just a story. It's a heart-wrenching fight for survival, a battle of love against cruelty that'll grip your soul and hold it tight. Stay with me. You won't believe what this child's courage unleashes. You'll want to hear every word. The air in Ridgewood was thick with tension on March 23, 2025, as a storm rolled in like a dark tide, swallowing the late afternoon in shadows. Inside the Wells' modest home, Ethan, a 5-year-old with eyes like the summer sky, sat cross-legged on the living room floor. His small hands stacked wooden blocks into wobbly towers, each clack a soft rebellion against the growing roar outside. Rain lashed the windows, streaking the glass like tears, and the wind howled through the jungle that pressed against their backyard, a dense, untamed wall of green that seemed to breathe secrets into the night. Ethan's mother, Ava, stood in the kitchen, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, her apron dusted with flour from a day spent chasing normalcy. She stirred a pot of chicken soup, the steam curling upward, a fragile shield against the unease creeping into her bones. Liam, her husband and Ethan's father, was still out there, his old pickup battling the slick roads home from the hardware store where he worked. She glanced at the clock, 5:47 p.m., and willed him to hurry. Lightning split the sky, a jagged scar of white that threw Ethan's shadow across the room. He froze, his latest block tumbling to the carpet with a muffled thud. His head tilted, as if straining to catch a sound beneath the storm's fury. Ava didn't notice at first, her focus on the simmering broth, but then his voice reached her, soft, fragile, like a bird caught in a gale. "Mommy," he whispered, barely audible over the rain's relentless drumming. She turned, spoon hovering midair, and saw him standing now, his small palms pressed flat against the cold glass of the window. His reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, a boy too young to carry such weight. "Someone's crying," he said, his breath fogging the pain. Ava set the spoon down, wiping her hands on her apron as she crossed the room. "It's just the wind, sweetheart," she said, her tone gentle but firm, the practical voice of a mother who'd soothed 100 imagined fears. Storms always stirred Ethan's imagination. He'd once sworn the thunder was a giant stomping through the trees. But this was different. He didn't turn to her, didn't smile that shy grin she adored. Instead, his shoulders tensed, his fingers curling against the glass. "No!" he insisted, his voice trembling now, a thread of desperation weaving through it. "They're calling me, Mommy. They're scared." Tears welled in his blue eyes, spilling over to trace paths down his cheeks, and Ava's heart clenched, a sudden sharp ache she couldn't name. She knelt beside him, her knees sinking into the worn carpet, and placed a hand on his shoulder. His small body was rigid, humming with something she couldn't grasp. "Who's calling you, baby?" she asked, her voice softening as she brushed a lock of sandy hair from his forehead. Lightning flashed again, closer now, and thunder followed, a deep rumble that shook the house to its bones. Ethan's gaze darted to the jungle beyond their yard, a wilderness that stretched for miles, untamed and unknowable. "The dogs," he whispered, his breath hitching. "They're hurting. They need help." His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through Ava's calm. Dogs? In the jungle? It made no sense, yet Ethan's certainty, that strange, unshakable knowing in his eyes, tugged at a memory. Just last month, he'd led them to Mrs. Patterson's missing cat, trapped under a porch, claiming he'd heard its cries when no one else had. She'd chalked it up to luck, a child's intuition. But this was something more. Ava's hand stilled on his shoulder, her practical mind wrestling with the impossible. The storm was worsening, branches clawing at the house like desperate fingers, and Liam would be home any minute, drenched and hungry. Going out there was madness, especially with Ethan so small, so vulnerable. Yet as she looked into his tear-streaked face, she saw not just her son, but a boy who felt pain that wasn't his own, a boy who heard what others couldn't. "Ethan," she began, searching for words to gentle him back to safety. But he turned to her then, his eyes pleading, raw with a sorrow too big for his years. "Please, Mommy," he begged, his voice breaking. "They won't last much longer." And in that moment, Ava felt it too, a pull, faint but undeniable, like a thread tied to her heart, stretching out into the storm. What if he was right? What if something, needed them? The question hung there, heavy and unanswered, as the front door burst open, bringing the wild with it. The storm's fury battered the Wells home, a relentless siege of rain and wind that seemed to claw at the very walls. Inside, Ethan's tearful pleas hung in the air like a haunting melody, his small voice cutting through the chaos with a clarity that shook Ava to her core. "The dogs, Mommy! They're in the jungle, chained up! The pregnant one's dying!" His words weren't the whimsy of a child's imagination. They carried a weight, a desperate truth that gnawed at her skepticism. Ava stood frozen by the window, her hand still on Ethan's trembling shoulder, her practical mind screaming that this was madness. The jungle beyond their backyard was a wild, unforgiving sprawl. Miles of tangled trees and hidden dangers. No place for a 5-year-old, especially not in this tempest. Yet Ethan's eyes, brimming with tears, and something ancient, something knowing, held her captive. She'd seen that look before, when he'd found Mrs. Patterson's cat, shivering and lost, guided by a call no one else could hear. Was this the same gift, or something deeper, darker? Before she could find an answer, the front door slammed open, a gust of wind and rain heralding Liam's arrival. He stepped inside, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his work jacket dripping puddles onto the floor. "This storm's a beast," he said, shaking water from his sleeves, his voice rough with exhaustion. He dropped his toolbox by the door, then stopped short, his hazel eyes catching the scene. Ethan's tear-streaked face, Ava's uncertainty etched in the lines of her brow. "What's going on?" he asked, crossing the room in 3 strides. Ethan turned to him, his small body trembling but resolute. "Daddy, we have to help them," he sobbed, his voice breaking like fragile glass. "The dog's in the jungle. They're chained up. The pregnant one's very sick. She's going to die if we don't go now." Liam's expression softened, but a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Buddy, it's just the storm out there. There's no—" "They're calling me!" Ethan's shout startled them both, his little hands balling into fists, his lips quivering with a mix of fear and determination. "Please believe me." Ava and Liam exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Years of trust, love, and the unspoken question, what if he's right? Liam knelt beside his son, his calloused hand cupping Ethan's cheek. "Okay, buddy," he said, his voice steady despite the storm's roar. "We'll check, but we stay together." Ava's heart thudded, a protest rising in her throat, but Liam met her gaze, his eyes firm. "I'll get the flashlights and raincoats," he said, standing. "We'll be quick, just to ease his mind." Relief flooded Ethan's face, a spark of hope igniting through his tears. "Hurry," he urged. "She's getting weaker." 10 minutes later, they stood on the back porch, the storm a living thing around them. Ava zipped Ethan's yellow raincoat, her fingers fumbling as rain lashed her face despite the overhang. "Stay close," she instructed, pulling his hood tight, her voice nearly lost to the wind. "Don't run ahead. The jungle's dangerous." Liam tested the flashlights, their beams slicing through the gray curtain of water. "We'll look fast," he promised Ava, shouting over the gale. But as they turned, Ethan was already moving, halfway down the steps, his small figure a blur of yellow against the deluge. "Ethan!" Ava cried, fear gripping her chest like a vice. She and Liam bolted after him, mud splashing their boots as they reached the jungle's edge, where the trees swallowed the last of the daylight. Ethan moved with a purpose that defied logic, weaving through the undergrowth as if guided by an invisible thread. Ava's breath came in sharp gasps, her raincoat soaked through, branches snagging her hair and scratching her cheeks. Liam's flashlight danced across wet leaves and gnarled trunks, the beam trembling with his haste. "Ethan, slow down!" he called, but the boy pressed on, turning at forks in the faint path without hesitation. "It's just a little farther," Ethan said, his voice eerily calm now, cutting through the storm's din. "Can't you hear them?" Ava opened her mouth to argue. Hear what? When she stopped. A sound pierced the rain and thunder, faint but unmistakable. A whimper, weak and broken. Liam heard it too, his head snapping toward it. "This way," Ethan said, surging forward. The path narrowed, then widened into a small clearing. A massive fallen tree lay sprawled across the ground, its roots clawing at the sky. And there, half hidden by its bulk, Ava saw them. 2 German shepherds, their fur matted with mud and blood, chained to the trunk. Max, the smaller one, lifted his head weakly, his eyes glinting in the flashlight's glow, fierce yet pleading. Beside him, Luna lay motionless but for the shallow rise of her swollen belly, her golden coat dulled by suffering. "Oh my God," Ava breathed, her hand flying to her mouth, tears mingling with the rain on her face. Ethan dropped to his knees beside Luna, his small hand reaching out. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice a lifeline in the dark. Liam knelt too, his hands trembling as he tugged at the rusted chains. Ava's heart shattered at the cruelty. Who could do this? And as they worked to free the dogs, a shadow flickered between the distant trees, watching, waiting, then vanishing into the storm's embrace. The Wells home was a fragile island of light amidst the storm's relentless siege, its walls trembling as thunder rolled like a beast prowling the night. Inside, the living room had transformed into a sanctuary, a patchwork of blankets and towels cradling the 2 German shepherds they'd pulled from the jungle's grasp. Ava stood in the doorway, her raincoat dripping onto the hardwood, her auburn hair plastered to her face, strands clinging like threads of worry. Her hands still shook from the cold and the sight of those chains, rusted, cruel, biting into Max and Luna's flesh. Liam knelt by the dogs, his flashlight abandoned on the coffee table, its beam casting long shadows that danced with the flickering storm outside. Ethan sat cross-legged beside Luna, his small fingers tracing gentle circles on her matted fur. His blue eyes locked on her as if he could will her strength back into her frail body. The air was thick with the scent of wet dog and mud, but beneath it lingered something heavier: fear, exhaustion, and a quiet, desperate hope. Ava's voice broke the silence, raw and urgent. "I'll call Dr. Parker," she said, fumbling for her phone with hands that wouldn't steady. She dialed the vet's number, her breath hitching as the line rang, each tone a plea for help. Liam glanced up, his hazel eyes meeting hers, and she saw the same question mirrored there. How could anyone abandon them like this? Max, the smaller of the 2, lay with his head resting on his paws, his dark fur streaked with blood from wounds too deep to be mere accidents. His eyes, sharp and wary, followed every movement, a survivor's gaze that spoke of battles fought and lost. Beside him, Luna's swollen belly rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths, her golden coat dulled to a sickly sheen. Pregnant, Ethan had said, and dying. Ava's chest tightened at the thought, a mother's instinct flaring for a creature she'd only just met. Dr. Grace Parker arrived 20 minutes later, her gray hair damp and disheveled, her medical bag slung over her shoulder like a soldier's pack. She stepped inside, shaking water from her coat, and her sharp eyes softened as they landed on the dogs. "Oh, you poor things," she murmured, kneeling beside them with a grace that belied her years. Ethan didn't move, his hand still on Luna's head, his whispers too soft for Ava to catch, but enough to make the dog's ears twitch. "Doctor." Parker's fingers moved with practiced care, pressing gently against Max's wounds, her brow furrowing as she cataloged the damage, cuts jagged and precise, scars older than the storm. "These aren't from neglect alone," she said, her voice low, weighted with something unspoken. She turned to Luna, lifting her gums to reveal pale, dehydrated flesh, feeling the heat of a fever that burned beneath her skin. "She's severely malnourished, Doctor," Parker reported, her tone clinical but her eyes betraying a flicker of anger. "The pregnancy's straining her. She needs fluids, antibiotics now." Ava hovered nearby, her arms crossed tight against her chest, as if holding herself together. "Who would do this?" she whispered, rain mingling with the tears she hadn't noticed falling. Liam stood, his hands clenched into fists, his normally steady voice rough with emotion. "Someone who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as them." Dr. Parker pulled a handheld scanner from her bag, running it over Max's neck. It beeped, and her expression darkened. "Microchips," she said, checking Luna next, the second beep confirming her fear. "They're registered to Victor Hayes." The name hung in the air like a storm cloud of its own, heavy and ominous. Ava's stomach twisted. "Victor Hayes?" she asked, though the vet's tone suggested she should know. Dr. Parker glanced at Ethan, then lowered her voice. "He's a recluse up on North Hill, wealthy, powerful. Rumors swirl about him, underground dealings, maybe fighting rings. Nothing proven, but—" She trailed off, her gaze returning to Max's wounds, the unspoken truth cutting deeper than words. Ethan's small voice broke the tension, soft but piercing. "She's scared for her babies," he said, his hand resting on Luna's distended belly. Ava turned to him, her breath catching. "How do you know that, sweetheart?" she asked, kneeling beside him. His eyes met hers, solemn and far too old for his 5 years. "I just do," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Dr. Parker watched him, a flicker of curiosity in her lined face, but said nothing. She began setting up an IV for Luna, her movements swift and sure, while Liam fetched more blankets from the closet, his footsteps heavy with purpose. Ava stayed close, her hand brushing Ethan's hair, marveling at the bond already forming between her son and these broken creatures. Outside, the storm raged on, its howls a stark contrast to the fragile peace within, a peace shadowed by the name Victor Hayes, a threat they couldn't yet see but could already feel, pressing against the walls of their haven like the rain itself. This scene builds an emotional bridge between the family and the dogs, emphasizing their vulnerability and the looming menace of Victor Hayes. Ethan's mysterious empathy and the parents' protective instincts create a heartfelt connection, while the storm's backdrop heightens the tension, urging listeners to stay for the next chapter. Let me know if you'd like Scene 4 or any adjustments. The Wells home clung to its fragile warmth as the storm outside battered it with unrelenting fury, the night stretching into an endless shroud of rain and thunder. Inside, the living room glowed faintly with the flicker of a single lantern, its light casting soft shadows over the makeshift sanctuary where Max and Luna rested. Ava sat on the couch, her knees drawn up, her auburn hair still damp from the jungle trek, her eyes fixed on the 2 German shepherds who had already carved a space in her heart. Liam paced near the window, his silhouette tense against the rain-streaked glass, his hands flexing as if he could wrestle the storm itself into submission. Ethan knelt beside Luna, his small frame a quiet anchor, his fingers tracing soothing patterns on her golden fur, the IV drip doctor. Parker had set up glistened in the dimness, a lifeline threading through the pregnant dog's fragile body, her shallow breaths a rhythm that held them all captive. Max lay close, his wounded frame protective, his dark eyes glinting with a vigilance that spoke of battles endured. The clock on the mantel ticked past midnight when a sudden stillness fell, not outside, where the storm roared on, but within the house. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging them into darkness save for the lantern's glow. Ava's breath caught, her hand reaching instinctively for Liam's arm as he turned from the window. "Power's out," he muttered, his voice tight. But before he could move to check the breaker, Ethan's calm, eerie words sliced through the silence. "He did this," he said, his blue eyes lifting to meet theirs, steady and unblinking. "He's coming." Ava's heart stuttered, a cold shiver racing down her spine. "Who? Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. He didn't answer, his gaze returning to Luna as if she held the secret, and Ava exchanged a look with Liam. Fear, confusion, and a shared ache for their son's mysterious burden. Hours crept by, the darkness a heavy blanket pressing against them, until Luna's soft whimpers shifted into something deeper, more urgent. Ava slid to the floor beside Ethan, her hands hovering, uncertain but drawn by a mother's instinct. "She's in labor," Liam said, kneeling too, his voice a mix of awe and worry. Max stirred, his ears perking, and then he moved, gentle, deliberate, his teeth tearing the first birth sac with a tenderness that stole Ava's breath. A tiny wet bundle emerged, dark and squirming, and Max licked it clean, nudging it toward Luna's warmth. The puppy squeaked, a feeble sound that broke the night's tension, and Ava's eyes stung with tears. "It's alive," she whispered, her voice cracking as Liam's hand found hers, squeezing tight. Ethan watched, his small face alight with wonder. "A boy," he said confidently, and Ava didn't question how he knew. She felt it too, the miracle unfolding before them. One by one they came, 6 fragile lives, each ushered into the world by Max's careful paws and Luna's exhausted strength. Shadow, Ember, River, Storm, Echo, and Dusk. Ethan named them in a quiet litany, his voice a thread of certainty weaving through the chaos. Ava marveled at their tiny bodies, their blind eyes and wobbly movements, each squeak a testament to resilience against all odds. Liam's rough fingers brushed her cheek, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "They're beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion, and Ava nodded, her heart swelling until it ached. Luna, though weak, lifted her head, her golden eyes meeting Ethan's, a silent exchange that sent a shiver through Ava. What did her son see in those depths? What did he hear that she couldn't? The joy was fleeting, a fragile bubble pierced by Ethan's sudden shift. His small body tensed, his gaze darting to the window where shadows danced beyond the lantern's reach. "We need to hide them," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, urgent and chilling. "He's close." Ava's pulse quickened, her arms wrapping around him instinctively. "Who's close, sweetheart?" she pressed, but he only shook his head, his eyes wide with a fear that mirrored Luna's trembling form. Liam stood, his silhouette towering as he grabbed the flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark. "I'll check outside," he said. But Ethan's hand shot out, clutching his sleeve. "Don't," he begged, his voice small but fierce. "He's watching." Max growled then, a low rumble from deep in his chest, his hackles rising as he positioned himself between Luna and the door. The puppies squirmed against their mother, oblivious to the tension coiling around them like a snake. Ava pulled Ethan closer, her heart pounding against her ribs, the warmth of new life clashing with the icy dread seeping into the room. The storm outside howled on, a chorus to their fear, and in that moment, Ava felt it. The presence Ethan sensed, a shadow beyond the walls waiting, biding its time. The dogs had found a haven, but it was a haven under siege, and the night was far from over. The Wells home trembled under the storm's relentless assault, the darkness within broken only by the lantern's fragile glow, casting a golden halo over the living room's makeshift sanctuary. Ava sat on the floor, her arms wrapped around Ethan, his small body pressed against her as he whispered to the 6 newborn puppies nestled against Luna's side. Shadow, Ember, River, Storm, Echo, and Dusk, their tiny forms a testament to life's stubborn will. Liam stood by the window, his broad shoulders tense, his flashlight beam darting across the rain-lashed glass, searching the night for the threat Ethan had sensed. Max lay vigilant beside Luna, his ears twitching at every gust, his dark eyes glinting with a fierce protectiveness that mirrored Liam's own. The air was thick with the scent of damp fur and the faint tang of antiseptic from Dr. Parker's earlier visit, but beneath it pulsed something heavier, dread, coiling tight around Ava's chest like a rope she couldn't shake loose. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. He's close. And though she didn't know who he was, the certainty in her son's voice chilled her to the bone. A sharp knock shattered the stillness, 3 hard raps against the front door that made Ava's heart lurch. Liam spun from the window, his flashlight beam slicing toward the sound, his free hand curling into a fist. "Who the hell's out in this?" he muttered, his voice rough with suspicion. Ava tightened her grip on Ethan, her pulse racing as Max's growl rumbled low, a warning that vibrated through the floor. Before Liam could reach the door, it creaked open. A master key turning in the lock, and a figure stepped inside, rain dripping from his cap, his silhouette lean and menacing in the lantern's glow. He was young, no older than 25, with a sharp jaw and cold, calculating eyes. In his hand gleamed a tranquilizer gun, its sleek barrel catching the light, and Ava's stomach dropped like a stone. "Mr. Hayes sent me," the intruder said, his voice a sneer that cut through the storm's din. "Those dogs belong to him. Hand them over and I'll be gone." He took a step forward, water pooling at his boots, and Ava's fear ignited into fury. "Get out!" she snapped, rising to her feet, her body shielding Ethan and the puppies. Liam moved faster, planting himself between the man and the dogs, his broad frame a wall of defiance. "You're not taking them," he said, his tone low and dangerous, the kind of quiet that promised a storm of its own. Max bared his teeth, his growl deepening, and Luna whimpered, her exhausted body curling tighter around her pups. The intruder smirked, raising the tranquilizer gun. "Don't make this hard," he warned. But before he could aim, Ethan darted forward, his small body a blur of yellow raincoat. "No!" he shouted, slamming into the man's legs with all the force his 5 years could muster. The gun jerked upward, a dart firing wild into the ceiling with a dull thud. Liam lunged, his shoulder crashing into the intruder's chest, and they hit the floor hard, grappling in a tangle of limbs. Max sprang, his teeth sinking into the man's arm, a snarl tearing from his throat as the intruder yelped, the gun skittering across the hardwood. Ava scooped Ethan back, her arms trembling as she pressed him to her chest, his sobs hot against her neck. "You're okay, baby?" she whispered, her voice breaking, but her eyes stayed locked on the fight. Liam pinned the man, his knee pressing into his back, his breath ragged. "Who's Hayes?" he demanded, twisting the intruder's arm until he gasped. "Tell me!" The man spat, his voice strained. "You're dead if you keep them. He doesn't lose what's his." Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing closer, and the intruder's eyes widened, panic flickering through his bravado. He wrenched free, scrambling to his feet, and bolted into the night, leaving the tranquilizer gun behind like a taunt. Liam staggered up, clutching his side where a stray elbow had landed, and Ava rushed to him, Ethan still in her arms. "You're hurt," she said, her hands hovering over him, but he shook his head, pulling them both close. "I'm fine," he rasped, his embrace fierce. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows as Officer Brewer stepped inside, his uniform soaked, his skepticism etched deep. "Got a call about a break-in," he said, eyeing the gun on the floor. "Victor Hayes, huh? Big name around here. Big donor, too." Ava's anger flared, her voice sharp. "Donor or bribe?" Brewer's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, Dr. Parker burst through the door, her face pale, her arms clutching a folder. "My clinic's trashed," she said, breathless, holding up photos, chains, blood, marked VH. "This ties to Hayes." The room stilled, the weight of her words sinking in, and Ava looked at Ethan, his small hand resting on Max's head. The night had spared them, but Hayes's shadow stretched long and dark, a promise of more to come. The Wells home stood silent in the wake of the intruder's retreat, the storm outside a fading growl as the clock ticked past midnight. Inside, the air buzzed with a fragile stillness, the lantern's glow flickering over the living room where Ava cradled Ethan against her chest, his small body trembling from the night's chaos. His blue eyes, wide and haunted, darted to Luna and her 6 puppies: Shadow, Ember, River, Storm, Echo, and Dusk, curled against her side, their tiny whimpers a soft counterpoint to the tension coiling around them. Max sat guard, his ears pricked, his dark fur still bristling from the fight, his gaze locked on the door as if daring the shadows to return. Liam paced, his boots scuffing the hardwood, his hands clenching and unclenching, the bruise on his side a dull ache he ignored. Officer Brewer had left with Dr. Parker's evidence. His parting words, "Stay safe, but Hayes has pull," ringing hollow, a warning wrapped in doubt. Ava's heart thudded, Ethan's earlier whisper, "He's close," echoing like a ghost she couldn't shake. "We can't stay here," Liam said, his voice low but resolute, breaking the silence as he stopped mid-step. He turned to Ava, his hazel eyes burning with a mix of fear and determination. "Hayes knows where we are. He'll send more than one punk next time." Ava's throat tightened, her arms instinctively tightening around Ethan, the weight of his small frame grounding her against the rising panic. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice cracking, the image of that tranquilizer gun flashing in her mind, cold, precise, meant for the dogs they'd sworn to protect. Liam crossed to her, kneeling so their faces were level, his rough hand brushing her cheek. "Oregon," he said firmly. "Your sister's place, 5 hours west. She's got land, space to hide. We leave now under the storm's cover." Ava nodded, tears pricking her eyes, the thought of fleeing their home twisting her gut. But the alternative, Hayes's shadow closing in, was a nightmare she couldn't face. They moved fast, a quiet frenzy fueled by adrenaline. Liam hauled a duffel bag from the closet, stuffing it with clothes, blankets, a first aid kit, anything they could grab. Ava gathered food, bread, peanut butter, a thermos of soup, her hands shaking as she glanced at the puppies, so small, so vulnerable. Ethan stood by Luna, his small voice steady despite the tremor in his lips. "We'll take them all," he said, and Ava's heart ached at his resolve, a child carrying a burden too big for his years. Liam rigged a plastic tub with towels, gently lifting Luna and her pups inside, her golden eyes meeting his with a trust that nearly broke him. Max leapt into the back seat of their old SUV without prompting, his presence a silent vow to guard them. Ava buckled Ethan in beside him, her fingers lingering on his cheek. "You're so brave," she whispered, and he managed a small, brave smile that pierced her soul. The engine rumbled to life at 12:47 a.m., headlights off to cloak them in the night. Liam eased the SUV out of the driveway, the town of Ridgewood sleeping under a deceptive calm, its streets slick and empty. Ava twisted in the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror, every shadow a threat, every gust a whisper of pursuit. The jungle loomed to their left, a dark wall swallowing the road's edge, and Ethan's voice came soft from the back. "He's still out there," he said, his hand resting on Max's fur, the dog's growl a low hum of agreement. Ava's stomach knotted, her breath shallow. How did he know? But before she could ask, twin beams flared behind them, bright and ruthless, cutting through the dark like a predator's gaze. "Liam!" Ava gasped, her hand gripping his arm, and he cursed under his breath, flooring the gas. The SUV jolted forward, tires slipping on wet asphalt as a black SUV surged closer, its engine a roar that drowned the fading storm. "Hold on!" Liam shouted, swerving onto a logging road that plunged into the jungle's heart, branches scraping the windows, mud splattering the windshield. The tub rocked, Luna whimpering, and Ava reached back to steady it, her heart pounding in her ears. Max's growl deepened. Ethan's whisper, "It's him," a dagger of ice in her chest. The road twisted, narrow and wild, the black SUV's lights flickering through the trees. Relentless. Liam's knuckles whitened on the wheel, his jaw set as he took a sharp fork north, deeper into the labyrinth, a desperate bid to lose their hunter. The jungle closed in, a tunnel of green and shadow, and Ava clung to the hope that it would swallow them whole. Hide them from the man who'd claimed the dogs as his own, the man whose cold eyes she hadn't yet seen but already feared. The night stretched taut, a thread ready to snap, and their flight became a heartbeat, a family running not just for survival, but for the love they'd found in the wild. The jungle's embrace tightened around the Wells SUV, its tangled arms of branches and vines clawing at the windows as Liam pushed the vehicle deeper into the night. The storm had faded to a distant grumble, leaving a heavy silence broken only by the engine's strained hum and the occasional whimper from Luna's puppies in their tub. Ava clutched the edge of her seat, her breath shallow, her eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the dark road ahead, where the black SUV's headlights flickered like a predator stalking its prey. Ethan sat in the back seat, his small hand buried in Max's fur, the German Shepherd's growl a constant undercurrent, his body coiled as if ready to spring. The logging road twisted and narrowed, a labyrinth of mud and shadow, and Liam's knuckles gleamed white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched with a resolve that masked the fear Ava knew he felt. They were running, fleeing Victor Hayes' reach, but the jungle offered no sanctuary, only a fleeting illusion of escape. A sudden jolt rocked the SUV, tires screeching as Liam slammed the brakes. Ahead, a massive fallen tree sprawled across the path, its gnarled trunk an impassable wall, roots jutting skyward like skeletal fingers. "Damn it!" Liam hissed, his voice sharp with frustration as he scanned for a way around, but the jungle pressed too close, its edges a cage of green. Ava's heart sank, her pulse pounding in her ears as the black SUV's lights flared brighter behind them, closing the gap with ruthless precision. The pursuer slowed, then stopped, pinning them in a beam of blinding white. "Liam," Ava whispered, her voice trembling, her hand reaching for his arm as doors slammed in the distance. Footsteps crunching on wet earth, deliberate and unhurried. 3 figures emerged from the glare, shadows stretching long and menacing. The tallest stepped forward, his silhouette sharpening into a man. Victor Hayes, his presence chilling even before his face came into view. He was broad-shouldered, his pale eyes glinting like ice in the flashlight's beam, his tailored coat absurdly pristine against the jungle's muck. 2 others flanked him, their faces obscured, their hands hovering near holsters that promised more than tranquilizers. "My dogs," Hayes said, his voice smooth and cold, cutting through the night like a blade. "You've caused me enough trouble. Hand them over and I'll let you walk away." His tone was calm, almost reasonable, but the threat beneath it coiled tight, a snake poised to strike. Liam stepped out of the SUV, his boots sinking into the mud, his broad frame a shield as he faced Hayes. "They're not yours anymore," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor Ava saw in his clenched fists. "They were dying, chained up, abandoned. You don't deserve them." Hayes' lips curled into a faint, mocking smile, his gaze shifting past Liam to the vehicle where Ava and Ethan waited, breathless. "Deserve?" he echoed, stepping closer, his boots silent on the sodden ground. "Their property, mine by law. You're thieves, nothing more." Ava's anger flared, her door swinging open as she stepped out, her voice raw. "They're family now," she snapped, her hands shaking but her stance firm. "You'll have to kill us first." Before Hayes could respond, Ethan slipped from the back seat, his small figure darting to stand beside his parents, Max at his heels. "They chose us," he said, his voice clear and defiant, his blue eyes locking onto Hayes with a courage that stole Ava's breath. The man's smile faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his cold features. Ethan, so small yet so unyielding, unsettled him. Ava seized the moment, her heart racing as she bluffed. "We've recorded everything. Your break-in, your threats. It's over." Hayes's eyes narrowed, his hand twitching toward his coat, but then, faintly, sirens wailed in the distance, a lifeline threading through the jungle's depths. He froze, his gaze darting to his men, then back to the family. "This isn't the end," he spat, his voice venomous as he retreated, the sirens growing louder. His men followed, melting into the shadows as the black SUV roared to life and vanished down the road. Ava exhaled, her knees buckling as Liam caught her, his arms strong around her shoulders. Ethan clung to Max, his small hand trembling now, the weight of his bravery sinking in. Headlights flashed, friendly ones this time, as Dr. Parker's truck rolled up, Officer Brewer beside her, his face grim but resolute. "Got your call," she said, holding up her folder of evidence. Photos, records, a noose tightening around Hayes. Liam sank to one knee, his hand brushing Max's fur, blood seeping from a graze on his arm he hadn't noticed. Ava pulled Ethan close, her tears mixing with the jungle's damp air, and as the police lights bathed them in red and blue, she knew they'd survived. But Hayes's parting vow lingered, a shadow they couldn't outrun yet. The days following the jungle confrontation stretched thin and fragile, a tense limbo where the Wells family clung to their home like survivors on a raft adrift. Sunlight filtered through the living room curtains, a pale contrast to the storm-soaked nights before, casting gentle beams over the 6 puppies, shadow, ember, river, storm, echo, and dusk, as they toddled across the floor, their tiny paws slipping on the hardwood. Ava sat on the couch, her auburn hair loose and tangled, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of tea, its steam long gone. Liam lounged beside her, his arm in a sling from the graze Hayes's men had left, his hazel eyes tracking Ethan as the boy played with the pups, his laughter a rare, bright thread in the heavy air. Max lay near Luna, his wounds healing under Dr. Parker's care, his dark gaze softer now, though still watchful. The police had searched Hayes's estate. Officer Brewer's call the night before had been curt. Nothing solid yet. His lawyers are stonewalling. Ava's stomach twisted at the news, the weight of Hayes's influence pressing down like a storm that refused to break. Ethan rolled a small ball across the floor. Shadow, the runt dark as midnight, scrambling after it with a yip that made Ava's lips twitch into a fleeting smile. But then Ethan paused, his blue eyes narrowing, his small head tilting as if listening to a whisper no one else could hear. "He's hiding something," he said, his voice quiet but firm, his gaze drifting to the window where the jungle loomed beyond their yard. Ava set her mug down, her heart stuttering. "Who, sweetheart?" she asked, sliding to the floor beside him, her hand brushing his sandy hair. "Hayes," Ethan replied, his fingers tightening around the ball. "At the cabin, where we found them. It's there." Liam leaned forward, wincing as his sling shifted, his voice low. "The cabin in the jungle? We barely got out alive. What could be left?" Ethan turned to Max, the dog's ears perking at his name, and said simply, "He knows." Ava and Liam exchanged a glance, a silent pact forged in the unspoken trust they'd built around Ethan's gift. A gift they didn't understand, but couldn't deny. "We'll go back," Liam said, standing despite the ache in his arm, his jaw set with a carpenter's stubborn resolve. Ava hesitated, fear clawing at her chest. Hayes's cold promise, "This isn't the end," echoing in her mind. But the thought of letting him win, of letting Max and Luna's suffering go unanswered, steeled her. "During daylight," she agreed, her voice firm. "We take Max. He'll lead us." Ethan nodded, his small hand resting on Max's head, a bond that pulsed with a quiet, unshakable strength. By noon, they stood at the jungle's edge, the air thick with damp earth and the hum of unseen life. Max trotted ahead, his limp nearly gone, his nose low as he guided them back to the clearing where the fallen tree still lay, its chains now gone but its scars etched deep. Ava's breath caught at the memory, Luna's frail body, Max's defiant eyes, and Liam squeezed her hand, his warmth a lifeline. Ethan pointed to a dilapidated cabin half hidden by vines, its sagging roof and broken windows a ghost of neglect. "There," he said, and Max growled softly, his hackles rising as he approached the door. Liam pushed it open, hinges groaning, revealing a dusty interior, empty save for a worn rug and a rusted stove. But Max pawed at the floor, insistent, his claws scraping until Liam knelt, prying up a loose board. Beneath it yawned a trapdoor, its edges splintered, a faint stench of blood and fear rising from the dark. Ava's stomach lurched as Liam lifted it, revealing a narrow ladder descending into shadow. "Stay with Ethan," he told her, but she shook her head, her voice fierce. "We do this together." They climbed down, Max at their heels, into a cavernous space, a fighting pit. Its dirt floor stained crimson, chains dangling from the walls like skeletal arms. A wooden crate sat in the corner, and Liam cracked it open, pulling out a ledger. Names, dates, bets scrawled in a meticulous hand, a record of cruelty that turned Ava's knees weak. "This is it," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she snapped photos with her phone, tears blurring her vision. "Proof he can't bury," Max whined, pressing against Ethan, his memories of this place a silent scream, and Ava knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "You're safe now," she promised, her voice breaking as Liam's arm encircled them both. The pit's walls seemed to close in, a tomb of Hayes' sins, but they'd unearthed its truth, a weapon forged in blood and courage. They climbed back into the light, the ledger clutched tight, their family stronger for it. Yet the jungle's quiet held a whisper of danger still lurking, waiting to strike. The air in the jungle cabin's underground pit hung thick and stale, a suffocating shroud of blood and despair that clung to the Wells family as they stood over their discovery. Ava's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, its screen glowing with photos of the ledger, a meticulous catalog of Victor Hayes' cruelty, each line a scar etched into the lives of dogs like Max and Luna. Liam crouched beside the crate, his sling hanging loose, his hazel eyes dark with a fury he barely contained, the stained dirt of the fighting pit a silent witness beneath his boots. Ethan pressed close to Max, his small fingers buried in the German shepherd's fur, the dog's whine a haunting echo of memories this place held, memories of chains, of pain, of survival. The ladder back to daylight loomed behind them, a fragile promise of escape, but the weight of what they'd found anchored them, a truth too heavy to leave behind. A creak shattered the silence, wood groaning above, footsteps heavy and deliberate. Ava's head snapped up, her heart lurching as Max's ears flattened, his growl erupting into a sharp bark before a yelp cut it short, silenced by something unseen. "Liam!" she gasped, shoving the phone into her pocket as he surged to his feet, the ledger tumbling back into the crate. The trapdoor slammed shut, plunging them into near darkness, the lantern's faint glow swallowed by shadow. Boots thudded down the ladder, and Victor Hayes descended, his tall frame filling the pit's entrance, a handgun glinting in his grip, cold, lethal, a far cry from tranquilizers. His pale eyes swept over them, his tailored coat smeared with mud, his calm facade unraveling into a snarl of rage. "Trespassers!" he sneered, his voice a venomous hiss, "digging where you don't belong." Liam stepped forward, his broad shoulders squared, his sling dangling useless as he shielded Ava and Ethan. "It's over, Hayes," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his injured arm. "We've got proof. Your fighting ring, your bets. You're done." Hayes' laugh was sharp, a blade slicing through the tension. "Proof?" he mocked, leveling the gun at Liam's chest. "You think I'll let you walk out with that?" Before Liam could reply, the shot rang out, a deafening crack that echoed off the pit's walls. Liam staggered, blood blooming on his shoulder, the sling staining crimson as he hit his knees with a grunt. Ava screamed, her voice raw, lunging toward him as Ethan cried out, "Daddy!" Max charged, a blur of fur and fury, his teeth bared as he leapt at Hayes. The man swung the gun, but Max was faster, his jaws clamping onto Hayes' wrist, forcing a howl of pain as the weapon clattered to the dirt. Ava reached Liam, her hands pressing against the wound, blood slick and warm beneath her fingers. "Stay with me," she begged, tears streaming down her face, his ragged breaths a lifeline she clung to. Ethan darted forward, his small hands grabbing the fallen gun, its weight unsteady in his grip as he pointed it at Hayes, his voice shaking but fierce. "Stop hurting us!" The man froze, Max's teeth still locked on his arm, his pale eyes widening at the boy's defiance. A child holding his fate. Liam groaned, forcing himself up, his good hand wrenching Hayes' arm behind his back, pinning him despite the pain searing through him. "Ava, call!" he rasped, and she fumbled for her phone, her bloody fingers slipping as she dialed 911. "He's killing us!" she sobbed into the line, her voice breaking, the operator's calm response a distant hum against the chaos. Hayes lunged, a knife flashing from his coat, its blade grazing Liam's side before Max's snarl forced him back, the dog's ferocity a shield. Liam kicked the gun toward Ava, his strength waning, and she snatched it, her hands trembling as she aimed. "Move again, and I shoot," she warned, her voice a mother's fury, a wife's desperation. The pit pulsed with their struggle, blood, sweat, and the puppy's distant whimpers from above, a reminder of why they fought. Hayes' cold laugh returned, weaker now, his wrist bleeding under Max's grip. "You'll never win," he spat, but his bravado cracked as sirens wailed faintly, growing closer. Liam sank against the wall, his hand clutching Ava's, his breath shallow but alive. Ethan dropped beside him, tears streaking his face, Max limping to join them, his loyalty unwavering. Ava held the gun steady, her eyes locked on Hayes, the weight of their survival resting in her trembling hands. The ladder creaked again, help or more danger, and her heart pounded, a drumbeat of hope and fear. They'd faced the predator's strike, but the fight wasn't over, and in that blood-soaked pit, their love held them together, a fragile flame against the dark. The underground pit beneath the jungle cabin pulsed with the aftermath of violence, its blood-stained walls a silent witness to the Wells family's desperate stand. Ava knelt beside Liam, her hands slick with his blood, pressing against the gunshot wound in his shoulder as his breaths came shallow and ragged, each one a thread she clung to with all her might. Ethan huddled close, his small arms wrapped around his father's neck, tears cutting paths through the dirt on his face, his blue eyes wide with a fear he couldn't voice. Max stood over them, his fur matted with sweat and Hayes' blood, his limp pronounced but his stance unwavering, a guardian forged in the fire of loyalty. Victor Hayes slumped against the pit's wall, his wrist torn from Max's bite, his knife lost in the scuffle, his pale eyes glinting with a defiance that flickered like a dying flame. Ava's hands shook as she gripped the handgun, its cold weight steady despite the tremor in her voice. "Don't move," she warned, her fury a shield against the terror threatening to swallow her whole. Footsteps pounded above, the trapdoor creaking open as a beam of light sliced through the dark. Officer Brewer descending, his gun raised, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Drop it!" he barked, and Ava let the weapon fall, her hands flying back to Liam's wound, her breath hitching as Brewer's gaze swept the scene. Blood, a child, a snarling dog, and Hayes' crumpled form. "You're done," Liam rasped, his voice weak but fierce, his good hand aiming Hayes' own pistol at the man's chest, a final act of defiance as his strength ebbed. Brewer stepped forward, his boots crunching on the dirt, and yanked Hayes' arms behind his back, cuffs clicking shut with a sound that echoed like justice itself. "Victor Hayes, you're under arrest," he said, his tone clipped, his eyes narrowing at the ledger Ava thrust toward him, its pages a noose tightening around the tycoon's neck. Hayes' laugh was weak, a hollow sound swallowed by the pit's depths. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice venomous even as Brewer hauled him up the ladder, his threats fading into the night. Ava's attention snapped back to Liam, her tears falling hot and fast as she pressed harder against his shoulder, blood seeping through her fingers. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice breaking, and he managed a faint smile, his hand finding hers, sticky with red but warm with life. "Not going anywhere," he whispered. and Ethan buried his face in Liam's chest, his sobs muffled but raw. Max licked Liam's hand, a soft whine escaping him, and Ava felt the weight of their bond, a family forged in blood and love, unbroken despite the predator's strike. Sirens wailed closer, red and blue lights flashing through the trap door as Dr. Parker's voice called down, sharp with urgency. "I've got paramedics!" she shouted, descending with a medical bag, her gray hair wild, her hands steady as she took over from Ava, packing Liam's wound with gauze. "He'll make it," she said, her tone firm, and Ava exhaled a sob, relief crashing over her like a wave. Above, Brewer's men found Hayes' associate unconscious near the cabin. Max's doing, a silent testament to the dog's ferocity, and the pit's evidence was seized. The ledger, the chains, a story of cruelty now laid bare. Ambulances arrived, their engines a roar against the jungle's hush, and Liam was lifted onto a stretcher, his hand gripping Ava's as they climbed into the light. Dawn broke over the tree line, a soft pink bleeding into the gray, bathing the family in a glow that felt like mercy. Ava sat beside Liam in the ambulance, Ethan curled against her, Max at their feet, allowed by a sympathetic paramedic who saw the dog's scars and understood. Liam's breathing steadied under the oxygen mask, his eyes meeting Ava's with a quiet strength that anchored her. "We got him," he murmured, and she nodded, tears streaming down her face, her fingers threading through Ethan's hair. The puppies and Luna waited back home, safe with Mrs. Carter, their neighbor who'd finally broken her silence. But here, in this moment, it was just them. Battered, bloodied, but alive. Brewer approached as they reached the hospital, his face weary but resolute. "Hayes is in custody. Evidence is airtight," he said, glancing at Max with a rare flicker of respect. "You're safe now." Ava wanted to believe him, but Hayes' final words, "This isn't over," lingered like a shadow, a whisper of power that stretched beyond bars. She squeezed Liam's hand, Ethan's small warmth against her side, and felt Max's steady presence, guardians all. Justice had struck, but its light was dimmed by the shadows of Hayes' reach. And as the hospital doors slid open, Ava knew their fight had won a battle, not the war. Yet in their survival, in their love, they'd found a strength that no shadow could steal. The Wells home glowed with the soft light of late morning, a sanctuary reclaimed after days of chaos and blood. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows, dusting the hardwood with golden flecks where the 6 puppies, Shadow, Ember, River, Storm, Echo, and Dusk, tumbled over each other, their tiny yips and playful nips, a melody of life that softened the edges of memory. Ava stood in the kitchen doorway, her auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her hands cradling a steaming mug of coffee, its warmth seeping into her palms as she watched her family mend. Liam sat on the couch, his arm in a fresh sling from the hospital, the gunshot wound stitched and bandaged, his hazel eyes crinkling with a tired but genuine smile as Ethan darted past, chasing Shadow, the runt, small and dark, who'd claimed him as her own. Max lay sprawled near Luna, his wounds healing under Dr. Parker's steady care, his dark fur gleaming again, his gaze softer now, a warrior resting in the peace he'd fought for. Luna nursed her pups, her golden coat regaining its luster, her eyes meeting Ava's with a quiet gratitude that pierced her heart. Ethan flopped beside Liam, breathless with laughter, his small arms wrapping around his father's waist, careful of the sling. "You're okay now, Daddy," he said, his voice bright but edged with the echo of fear. Fear from the pit, from the blood, from nearly losing him. Liam ruffled his sandy hair, pulling him close with his good arm, his voice rough with emotion. "Thanks to you, buddy," he said, and Ava's throat tightened, the image of Ethan pointing that gun at Hayes flashing in her mind. A child forced to be brave beyond his years. She crossed the room, sinking beside them, her hand finding Liam's, their fingers lacing together in a silent vow. "We're all okay," she whispered, her tears held back but shimmering in her eyes, and Ethan nestled between them, his small warmth a bridge between their battered hearts. Dr. Parker arrived an hour later, her gray hair tied back, her medical bag slung over her shoulder like a badge of honor. She knelt by Max, checking his stitches, her fingers gentle as they traced the fading scars. "He's a fighter," she said, her voice warm with admiration, and Max thumped his tail, his dark eyes meeting hers as if he understood. She moved to Luna, lifting her gums, feeling her pulse, a smile breaking through her lined face. "She's stronger every day. The pups too," she reported. And Ava exhaled, relief washing over her like a tide. The puppies swarmed Dr. Parker's boots, Ember gnawing at her laces, and Ethan giggled, scooping him up. "They're happy now," he said, and Ava marveled at his certainty, his gift, a thread of empathy that tied him to these creatures in ways she couldn't fathom. The TV flickered in the background, headlines blaring Hayes' arrest. Local tycoon linked to illegal dog fighting ring. Ava muted it, her stomach twisting at his name, but Liam squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "He's locked up. Evidence is piling up. We did that." She nodded, but Brewer's warning lingered. Hayes' influence stretched deep, his bail hearing looming, a shadow that refused to fade. Dr. Parker stood, brushing puppy fur from her jeans. "You've got a legal fight ahead," she said, her tone pragmatic but kind. "But you've got the truth, and them." She gestured to Max, Luna, and the pups, a family within their own, and Ava felt a surge of resolve, a mother's fierce love for all of them. Ethan wandered to the window, shadow trailing him like a shadow indeed, her tiny paws tapping the floor. He pressed his hands to the glass, gazing at the jungle beyond their yard, its green expanse a silent witness to their trials. "We understand each other," he said softly, and Ava knelt beside him, her arm around his shoulders. "You and Shadow?" she asked, and he nodded, his blue eyes solemn. "All of them, but her most." Ava's heart ached at the mystery of him. A boy who heard cries others missed, who'd faced a monster and still found room for joy. She kissed his forehead, her voice a whisper. "You're my hero, you know that?" He smiled, small and shy, and Shadow yipped, nudging his leg as if agreeing. Liam joined them, his sling a stark reminder of their cost, but his presence solid, unwavering. "We'll keep fighting," he said, his hand resting on Ava's back, and she leaned into him, the three of them framed by the window, a unit forged in fire. Max rose, limping slightly to stand beside them, Luna watching with her pups, and Ava felt it. A bond deeper than words, a healing woven through their scars. Hayes' shadow loomed, but here, in this sunlit room, they were whole, their love a quiet strength that no threat could shatter. Not yet, not today. The afternoon sun draped the Wells home in a gentle glow, its rays slipping through the kitchen window to dance across the table where Ava sat. Her hands wrapped around a glass of iced tea, the clink of ice a soft rhythm against her thoughts. The house hummed with life, Ethan's laughter drifting from the living room where he played with Shadow, the runt puppy who followed him like a shadow indeed, her tiny yips blending with the rustle of Liam turning pages on the couch, his sling a quiet badge of their survival. Max sprawled near Luna, his dark fur catching the light, his steady breaths a testament to his healing, while the other puppies, Ember, River, Storm, Echo, and Dusk, napped in a tangle of fur beside their mother. Ava's auburn hair hung loose, brushing her shoulders, her eyes tracing the jungle beyond their yard, its green expanse a silent witness to their trials. The peace felt fragile, a gift, hard-won, but Hayes' shadow lingered, his bail hearing set for tomorrow, a whisper of power that kept her on edge. A knock at the front door broke her reverie, soft but insistent, and Ava rose, her bare feet padding across the hardwood. She opened it to find Mrs. Carter, their gray-haired neighbor from 2 houses down, standing on the porch, her hands clutching a tin of biscuits, her lined face etched with something heavy, guilt, perhaps, or regret.
"Ava,"
she said, her voice trembling, her eyes darting past her to the living room. Can I come in? I need to say something. Ava's brow furrowed, but she stepped aside, gesturing to the kitchen table. Of course, she said, her tone gentle but guarded, the memory of Mrs. Carter's silence during their ordeal a quiet ache she hadn't voiced. They sat across from each other, the tin between them, its lid dented from years of use. Mrs. Carter's fingers twisted together, her knuckles white, and Ava waited, her iced tea forgotten as the older woman drew a shaky breath. I saw them, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, her gaze dropping to the table. Weeks ago, Hayes's men, watching your place, black SUV late at night. I saw them from my window, but She faltered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't say anything. Fear kept me quiet. Hayes owns half this town, you know that. I thought if I stayed out of it, it'd pass. Ava's chest tightened, a mix of anger and sorrow swelling within her, anger at the silence that had shielded Hayes, sorrow for the fear that had bound this woman she'd known for years. Why now? Ava asked, her voice soft but edged with the pain of those nights. The break-in, the chase, Liam's blood on her hands. Mrs. Carter lifted her head, tears spilling over now, tracing paths down her weathered cheeks. I heard about the arrest. Saw it on the news, she said, her words tumbling out. And then I saw you all come back, battered but alive, with those dogs. I couldn't sleep, knowing I might have helped if I'd spoken up. She pushed the tin forward, a small offering. These are for you, for Ethan, Liam. I'm so sorry, Ava. Her voice broke, a sob escaping, and Ava's anger melted, replaced by a weary understanding. Fear was a chain she'd felt too, a weight they'd all carried. She reached across the table, her hand covering Mrs. Carter's trembling ones, the touch a bridge over the silence that had divided them. It's okay, Ava said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. You're here now. That matters. Mrs. Carter nodded, a fragile smile breaking through her tears, and Ava squeezed her hand, forgiveness a quiet gift they both needed. Stay, she added, standing to fetch a plate. The puppies would love a visitor. Mrs. Carter's eyes brightened, and she followed Ava to the living room, where Ethan grinned, offering Shadow a biscuit crumb from the tin. Liam looked up from his book, his sling shifting as he nodded to Mrs. Carter, his hazel eyes warm but knowing. She'd been part of the town's quiet complicity, but her confession cracked it open. Good biscuits, he said, taking one, and the tension eased, a small act mending a fracture. Shadow nibbled at Ethan's fingers, her tiny tail wagging, and Mrs. Carter sank to the floor beside them, her laughter mingling with Ethan's as Ember tugged at her sleeve. Ava watched, leaning against Liam, his arm around her waist, and felt the community's silence begin to thaw. Voices rising where fear had once reigned. The jungle outside stood still, its secrets buried for now, but Ava knew Hayes's hearing loomed, a test of their fragile peace. Yet here, with Mrs. Carter's guilt easing, with Ethan's joy and the puppy's trust, she felt a strength growing, a network of hearts, human and canine, bound by courage and second chances. The biscuits sat half-eaten on the table, a symbol of amends, and Ava smiled, her hand in Liam's, their family a beacon in a town waking from its fear. The sterile hum of the hospital room enveloped Ava like a cold embrace, its white walls and antiseptic scent a stark contrast to the jungle's wild chaos just hours before. It was the early morning after their escape from the pit, the clock on the wall ticking past 3 a.m., each second a heavy drop in the stillness. She sat beside Liam's bed, her chair pulled close, her auburn hair falling in messy strands across her face, her hands clasped tight in her lap to keep them from trembling. Liam lay beneath a thin blanket, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of shallow breaths, an oxygen mask fogging faintly over his pale lips. The gunshot wound in his shoulder was bandaged, a stark white patch stained with the faintest red, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing him. His sling rested on the bedside table, discarded by the nurses, and his hazel eyes were closed, lost to a medicated sleep that promised healing but left Ava aching for his voice, his strength, Ethan curled beside his father, his small body tucked into the crook of Liam's uninjured arm, his sandy hair mussed against the pillow, his blue eyes finally shut after hours of tears and restless fear. Max lay at the foot of the bed, his dark fur a quiet shadow, his head resting on Liam's legs. A guardian even here, allowed by a sympathetic nurse who'd seen his scars and whispered, "He's earned it." Ava's gaze lingered on them, her husband, her son, their dog, a trio bound by a love she felt in her bones, a love that had carried them through blood and darkness. The beeping of the heart monitor was a lifeline, steady and sure, but each sound pierced her, a reminder of the fragility she couldn't unsee. Liam's blood on her hands, Ethan's trembling grip on that gun, Max's limp as he'd fought for them. She leaned forward, her hand brushing Liam's, his skin warm but clammy, and a memory surged. Her days as a journalist, years ago, before Ethan, before this quiet life in Ridgewood. She'd exposed corruption then, chasing stories of greed and power with a fire that had earned her scars of her own. Threats, late-night calls, a brick through her apartment window. She'd walked away from it for Liam, for the family they'd built, trading her pen for stability. But now that fire flickered awake, fueled by Hayes's cruelty, by the dogs he'd broken, by the family he'd nearly torn apart. "I should have seen him coming," she whispered, her voice a thread in the dark, guilt gnawing at her. Hayes's shadow had loomed over their town, and she'd missed it, too buried in routine to notice. Ethan stirred, a soft whimper escaping him, and Ava reached over, her fingers smoothing his hair, her touch a silent promise. "I'm here. You're safe." His nightmare faded, his breathing easing, and she marveled at his resilience, a boy who'd faced a monster and still clung to hope. Max lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting hers, a bond forged in the pit's blood and dirt, and Ava felt tears well, hot and unbidden. "You saved us," she murmured to him, her hand brushing his fur, and he thumped his tail once, a quiet acknowledgement that broke her open. She'd almost lost them all. Liam to a bullet, Ethan to fear, Max to Hayes's wrath, and the weight of that near loss pressed against her chest, a sob she swallowed to keep the room still. Liam's eyes fluttered open then, hazy with painkillers but alive, locking onto hers with a clarity that stole her breath. "Ava," he rasped, his voice muffled by the mask, and she leaned closer, her hand tightening around his. "I'm here," she said, tears spilling now, tracing paths down her cheeks. He squeezed back, weak but steady, his fingers threading through hers, sticky with hospital tape but warm with life. "We're stronger than him," he whispered, and Ava nodded, her sob breaking free despite her effort to hold it in. "We are," she agreed, her voice trembling, and Ethan shifted, blinking awake, his small hand finding Liam's chest. "Daddy," he mumbled, and Liam smiled, faint but real, pulling them both closer. Max's tail thumped again, a soft beat against the bed, and Ava felt the vigil shift. Not just survival, but a reclaiming of their strength. The hospital lights buzzed overhead, dawn creeping through the window in soft pinks, and Ava's resolve hardened. She'd fight for them, with every ounce of her past, every shred of her present. Hayes's hearing loomed, his influence a shadow. But here, in this room, they were whole, a family stitched together by love, by scars, by a dog who'd chosen them. The night passed, a vigil of quiet courage, and as Liam drifted back to sleep, Ava held watch, her heart a fortress, her tears a vow. They'd endure together no matter what came next. Weeks had passed since the hospital vigil, and the well's backyard bloomed with the tentative promise of spring, its grass a soft green carpet kissed by the morning sun. Ava stood at the edge of the porch, her auburn hair catching the light, a breeze tugging at the hem of her sweater as she watched the scene unfold, a chaotic ballet of life that warmed her battered heart. The 6 puppies, Shadow, Ember, River, Storm, Echo, and Dusk, romped across the yard, their tiny bodies stronger now, their fur glinting in shades of black, brown, and gold. Shadow, the runt, darted after Ethan, her dark form a blur as she nipped at his heels, his laughter ringing out like a bell, pure and unshackled. Liam leaned against the porch railing beside Ava, his sling gone, his shoulders stiff but healing, his carpenter's hands steady as he sipped coffee, his hazel eyes crinkling with a pride that needed no words. Max bounded after the pups, his limp nearly faded, his barks playful yet protective, a warrior turned shepherd in this fragile peace. Luna rested on a blanket near the steps, her golden coat gleaming with regained strength, her eyes half closed as she watched her brood, a quiet queen reigning over her chaotic court. Ava knelt beside her, her hand brushing Luna's fur, feeling the warmth of life beneath her fingers, a life they'd fought for, a miracle pulled from the jungle's jaws. "You're a good mom," she murmured, and Luna's tail thumped once, a soft acknowledgement that stitched Ava's heart a little tighter. Inside, the TV hummed faintly, headlines still buzzing with Hayes' case. Trial delayed, evidence mounts. But Ava turned from it, her focus on the yard, on the family they'd become, human and canine woven together by scars and love. Ethan flopped onto the grass, Shadow pouncing on his chest, her tiny tongue licking his face as he giggled, naming them aloud like a ritual. "Shadow's mine," he declared, hugging her close, then pointed to the others. Ember's fiery streak, River's calm gray, Storm's bold stance, Echo's curious tilt, Dusk's shy retreat. Ava smiled, her throat tightening at his joy, a boy who'd faced darkness and still found light in these small souls. Liam set his mug down, joining Ethan on the grass, his laughter rumbling as River tugged at his shoelace, Max nudging him with a playful shove. "They've got your spirit," he told Ethan, and Ava's eyes stung. Spirit born from courage, from a night that had nearly broken them but instead bound them deeper. Dr. Parker's truck rolled up the driveway, her gray hair tied back, her vet bag slung over her shoulder. She stepped out, grinning at the chaos, and Ava waved her over, gratitude swelling in her chest. This woman who'd stitched their wounds, who'd stood with them against Hayes. "They're thriving," Dr. Parker said, kneeling to check Luna, her hands gentle but sure. "Max, too, scars are fading." She glanced at Liam, nodding at his shoulder. "You're all mending." Ava sat beside her, the grass cool beneath her, and asked, "The legal fight, what's next?" Dr. Parker's smile faded, her voice low. "Hayes is out on bail, money talks. But the ledger, the pit, those are ironclad. We're meeting the DA tomorrow." Liam joined them, his arm around Ava, his tone firm. "We'll testify, whatever it takes." Dr. Parker nodded, her eyes warm. "You've got a pack behind you now. Us, the dogs, even the town's waking up." The puppies swarmed Dr. Parker, Echo chewing her bag, and Ethan laughed, pulling him back. Ava watched, her heart swelling. Max stood guard at the yard's edge, his vigilance softening into trust, his dark eyes scanning the tree line not with fear, but with calm. She leaned into Liam, his warmth steadying her, and whispered, "We've given them a home." He kissed her forehead, his voice rough with emotion. "They've given us one too." See, the legal battle loomed, Hayes' influence a shadow that refused to fade. But here, in this dawn-lit yard, Ava felt a strength growing, a family fortified by love, by the puppy's boundless energy, by Max's quiet watch. Shadow broke free, racing back to Ethan, and he scooped her up, promising, "We'll always protect you." Ava's tears fell then, silent but fierce, a vow echoing his, protection not just for the dogs, but for each other, a pact sealed in blood and sunlight. Liam's hand tightened around hers, Max's tail thumped against the grass, and Luna's gaze met Ava's, a shared understanding of survival, of hope. The jungle beyond stood silent, its threats held at bay, and Ava knew this dawn was theirs, a fleeting victory, a breath before the storm, but theirs nonetheless. The puppies played on, a chorus of life, and in their chaos, Ava found peace, a fragile but fierce flame to carry them forward. The sun dipped low over the Wells home, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, a quiet farewell to a day steeped in the gentle rhythm of healing. Ava stood on the back porch, her auburn hair catching the fading light, her arms crossed against the evening chill as she gazed at the yard, a sanctuary carved from chaos. Ethan sat cross-legged on the grass, Shadow cradled in his lap, her dark fur a soft contrast to the picture book he read aloud, his voice a melody of innocence reciting The Little Prince, a tale of bonds and stars that mirrored their own. The other puppies, Ember, River, Storm, Echo, and Dusk, sprawled nearby, their tiny bodies spent from a day of play, their breaths a soft chorus against the rustle of leaves. Liam stepped out beside Ava, his shoulder stiff but free of the sling, his carpenter's hands carrying a wooden puppy pen he'd crafted, its edges smooth with care. He set it down, his hazel eyes meeting hers, a smile tugging at his lips, worn but real, a testament to their survival. Max stood at the yard's edge, his dark silhouette framed by the jungle beyond, his ears pricked but his stance calm. No longer growling at shadows, his trust in their safety restored. Luna lay on her blanket, her golden coat aglow, her eyes half closed as she watched her pups, a mother's quiet pride radiating from her. Ava's heart swelled, a tender ache at the journey they'd endured. From a stormy night's cry to this moment, a family forged in fire and love. She leaned into Liam, his arm slipping around her waist, and whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" His kiss pressed against her forehead, warm and steady, his voice rough with emotion. "Together," he said, and the word held everything. The blood, the fear, the unbreakable thread that bound them to each other, and the dogs they'd saved. Ethan's voice paused, his small hand stroking Shadow's fur as he looked up, his blue eyes bright with a wisdom beyond his 5 years. "Families protect each other always," he said, a promise that echoed through the dusk, and Ava's tears welled, silent but fierce. She'd heard those words in the pit, in the hospital, a vow that had carried them through. She crossed to him, kneeling on the grass, her hand cupping his cheek. "Always," she agreed, her voice trembling, and Shadow yipped, nudging her fingers as if sealing the pact. Liam joined them, lowering himself with a wince, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder, and Max padded over, his tail thumping as he settled beside them. A circle complete, a fortress of love against the world. The TV inside flickered off, its news of Hayes' trial, plea bargain rumored, silenced for now. Dr. Parker had called earlier, her voice steady. "The DA's pushing hard. Testimony next week." Hayes was still out on bail, his influence a shadow that stretched long and cold, but the evidence, the ledger, the pit, their scars, was a blade poised at his throat. Ava felt the weight of it, a battle yet to be won. But here, in this golden hour, it faded beneath the laughter of her son, the warmth of Liam's touch, the trust in Max's eyes. She'd once been a journalist, chasing truth through shadows, and now that fire burned again, not for headlines, but for them, for the lives they'd reclaimed from Hayes' grip. Luna rose, stretching with a grace that belied her past, and nosed her pups, guiding them toward the pen Liam had built. Ember nipped at River, Storm rolled over Echo, and Dusk trailed behind, shy but curious, while Shadow stayed with Ethan, her loyalty unwavering. Ava laughed, a sound that broke free like a bird from a cage, and Liam pulled her close, his arms strong despite its scars. "They're ours," he said, and she nodded, her tears falling now, a release of all they'd held, fear, pain, and the fierce joy of this moment. Max's ears twitched toward the jungle, but he didn't growl, his vigilance softening into peace, and Ava knew they'd won something deeper than a trial, a home, a family, a dawn after the darkest night. The sky darkened, stars pricking through the twilight, and Ethan closed his book, leaning against Ava, shadow in his arms. "We're safe," he murmured, and she kissed his hair, her heart echoing his words. Safe, for now. A fragile gift they'd guard with everything they had. Liam's hand found hers, Max's warmth pressed against her leg, and Luna's gaze met hers, a silent pact of survivors. The jungle's echoes, of pain, of cries, faded into the past, replaced by puppy yips and Ethan's soft hum, a song of forever. Hayes's shadow lingered, a whisper of battles to come. But Ava stood tall, her family around her, their love a flame no storm could quench. Closing call to action. If this tale of courage and connection moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story, and subscribe for more. Tell me below, what would you risk for those you love? Your comments keep this journey alive.